It talks about the believer's walk. It talks about the believer's war. It refers to the weapons the believer is supposed to use. The word is translated in the book of Romans. The exact same Greek word uses instruments, referring to us as believers, whether we yield our weapons, our instruments, to Jesus for holiness or to the devil for lawlessness. The potential's there. I talked this morning about the fact that Paul often used the image of a soldier to describe his Christian journey. And so this morning I just introduced it with Paul's demeanor, and that is he had been accused of being bold when he wrote and sort of cowardly when he was present. And really what he tried to say is he tried to come to him with a spirit of meekness and gentleness and yet still speak the truth in love. And then that's in verse 1. He speaks of his humbleness, and in verse number 2, he just mentions that he can be bold, but he addresses an accusation, and the accusation is they have said that he walked according to the flesh. They were simply saying of him that he had a corrupt heart. They questioned his motive, his own personal evil self-interest, lustful pursuits, and illicit desires. And then Paul comes back in discernment, and he really desires to try to help the church in Corinth. He's writing from the city of Ephesus, and so he tells them about the believer's struggle. And he just simply said this about us, and it's biblically sound. We walk in the flesh. So in the physical sense, Christians and non-Christians alike exist in a human body. We're subject to both physical infirmities and all sorts of temptations. And whether we win or not is based on whether we subject ourselves to Christ, be controlled by the Word, and controlled by the Spirit, so that God can live His life out through us and help us to walk in victory. There is not a sin that you committed as a lost person that you do not have the potential of committing as a believer if you don't yield yourself to Jesus Christ. And so in the physical sense, he just simply reminds us that we walk in the flesh. If you want to read more along these lines of Paul's writings, read Romans chapter 6 and underline every time he says walk in the flesh, and then contrast it with walking in the Spirit. But then he says in a spiritual sense, we're walking in the flesh, but we do not war after or according to the flesh. And I mentioned this morning, sometimes I do, which means to pattern one's lifestyle after the impulses of the lower unredeemed nature. When you get saved, it doesn't mean that you still don't have some propensities, something that overwhelms you. And I'll tell you what we Baptists are bad about doing. We think other people's propensities to sin are worse than ours. That's why every now and then we'll say, I just don't see how they do that. I mean, I could see myself doing a lot of things, but I'd never do that, as though you've elevated your sin. You have a loftiness, which is an arrogance, when you look down on someone's sin and then at the same time feel like maybe yours is not as bad. I'll tell you why the church gets a bum rap on the way it deals with homosexuality. Because we don't stand as strong sometimes as we ought to in the face of the ungodliness in the life of those that are married.